just getting home from my women's studies group. Oh, it's always great to see my friends and share what we've been reading and discuss different topics, express our different points of view, select a new topic to ponder next time. You know, it occurs to me that there were times that people couldn't ponder or talk about the books they read because maybe there was only one book, like the Bible, and that was it. And you know, even until the 15th or 16th century, most people that would be my age and my status in life couldn't even read for themselves. Had to have maybe a priest or someone in the higher echelons, you know, read for them and interpret what they were supposed to believe about it. Well, I have a story about that for you today. Really excited to share. So let me put my items down and let's get to it, okay? Be right back. Well, here we are on my couch. Thanks for joining me again on HerStance. This is a story about someone who did stand up and read for herself and think for herself. But we want to start first about a question I need to ask you. What do you know about how our country was formed? Oh, Sandra, I know that. Pilgrims, Plymouth Rock, the Mayflower, corn or maize, the Tea Party, the first one, et voila, the United States of America, right? Well, here's another question. Have you heard of the Puritans? Well, these religious folk were the real founders of New England colonies. So, quick history lesson, because this is going to be important. Massachusetts was the first colony, and it used to be the entire size of New England, that is today. That was before it was broken out into multiple states. The Pilgrims, indeed, were the first to arrive in the New World. They arrived in 1600 at Plymouth, and the Puritans arrived in 1629 in Salem. The Pilgrims, they were religious separatists. So you'll recall that Henry VIII created his own Church of England when he wanted to break from the Roman Catholic Church because he couldn't get a divorce or annul his relationship with Queen Catherine of Aragon. So he created the Church of England, and then came the Reformation. Well, these pilgrims decided that they didn't want to be associated with the Church of England at all. They practiced in silence, quietly, their own sort of version of Protestant religion. And they kind of snuck away a little while to the Netherlands to practice a little more openly. But that culture wasn't really English, so they decided to come to the New World and settle the Massachusetts Bay Colony. But there was another group of reformists called the Puritans. They wanted to purify the Protestant church even more, but they felt they could reform it from within without breaking from the Church of England. Like the Pilgrims, they wanted to self-organize. They did not want a pope or a king as their supreme leader, but they weren't separating themselves completely. Here's another big difference that's important. the Pilgrims weren't wealthy. They, the separatists, had low-paying jobs, farmers. The Puritans, they had grander ideas. In fact, they wanted a religion that would be the light to the nation, right? Much more grandiose. And their numbers were larger. So while the Pilgrims migrated with about 100 people on the Mayflower, and half of them died on the voyage across the Atlantic Ocean, the Puritans, well-educated, a full number of families, totaling 1,000 on 17 ships, they brought their wealth and resources to really populate the New World. So in just 10 years, the Massachusetts Bay Colony became a Puritan stronghold. 20,000 Puritans, while the Plymouth was home to just 2,600 Pilgrims. So they were swallowed up by the Puritans. Anne Marbury was one of those Puritans. She was born in Alford, England, in July 1591, to a rather outspoken clergyman. He was jailed multiple times for being very vocal around his Puritan views around English Reformation. He believed they had not done enough to purify the church of the pomp and ceremony that was clearly associated with the Catholic religious services. And she grew up in a very learned atmosphere. She could read, she could write, she could think. She married merchant William Hutchinson in 1612. And in 1632, they decided to migrate to the Massachusetts Bay Colony. They had 14 children. And like her activities in England, Anne soon organized weekly meetings of Boston, Massachusetts women to discuss recent sermons, to give expression to her own theological views. And they became very popular, just as they were back in Boston, England. They attracted ministers, they attracted magistrates, so men and women were attending her weekly meetings. She criticized the beliefs of the mainstream Massachusetts Puritans for placing religious observance and the teachings of the ministers above the conscience of the individual. But she felt that everyone could feel the Holy Spirit and think for themselves. She also held a bit of a radical idea that people could earn salvation through their works, and they weren't predestined to be saved or damned at birth. This was called covenant of works. So through good works, through your life, you could be saved and go to heaven. At first, she had a great many followers from Boston. And then a man named John Winthrop, a Puritan founder of Massachusetts, became the governor. And he opposed Anne loudly. And she was taken to trial for telling lies about the ministers and damaging their reputation. In those days also, church membership and civil membership were intertwined. And to become a full member of the church, you did have to be able to write and share your story? Were you judged to be worthy enough to be a full member of the congregation? Well, she was convicted in 1637 and was sentenced to banishment. And for a number of years, she was under house arrest, we will say. And during this time, she refused to recant. So she was further tried before the Boston Church. So first it was a governmental trial, and then a church trial, and she was formally excommunicated. So after she was banished from the Massachusetts Bay Colony, she and her husband relocated to a small carve-out colony called Rhode Island. And we see that this is when the New England started to be carved out. Well, her husband, William Hutchinson, died in 1641. So she moved her children and some servants to Long Island Sound, settled there. Unfortunately, in 1643, she, her servants, and all but one child were killed in an Indian attack. Today, Hutchinson is widely accepted as a martyr for the cause of religious liberty and women's rights, and she's raised up as a hero of those merits. But it was not during her time, and how often that is the case, right? It has taken a while, hundreds of years, for her to be recognized. So there is a story to go with that. You see, in 1922, there was a statue commissioned to be made of bronze and placed in the State House of her likeness. However, you will find a very awkward story in the Boston Globe about how that statue came to be, how it came to be funded, and the controversy over where or if it should actually be installed. It first became commissioned by a very well-renowned sculptor at the time. It ended up being delivered as a plaster likeness cast and painted in a copper color like it would look as a bronze statue. And then there was some fundraising that was supposed to go on for it. And 2 years later, the bronze statue arrived. And the legislature seemed to have been confused as to why it arrived, if they had actually accepted the statue, and where among some other male likenesses would it go. And it went on for a number of months, and articles in the paper about where this statue of her should be. And in fact, we recall that if they were reading the history of Anne Hutchinson, she was still on the books as a very controversial figure, banished from the original colony and not yet recognized truly as, for her works or for her movement. However, there was a plaque placed, and it was placed at the in front of the West Wing of the State House some 5 months after it had been delivered. And the plaque below it says, "In memory of Anne Marbury Hutchinson, baptized in Alford, Lincolnshire, England, July 20, 1591, killed by the Indians at East Chester, New York, 1643. a courageous exponent of civil liberty and religious toleration. That was 1922 language. Finally, in 1987, Massachusetts Governor Michael Dukakis officially pardoned Anne Hutchinson. But an official dedication ceremony for the statue was not held until 2005. That was over 80 years after its placement at the State House. And furthermore, since 2001, the statue has been difficult to near impossible to actually access due to the heightened security measures around the State House post 9/11. So here we go. I want to take us just back to 1922 as I kind of wrap up my thinking about how we should view this today and think about Anne Hutchinson and her place in history. In 1922, when the statue was finally erected, these words were published in the Boston Globe. Usually, the bronze does not make its appearance until long after the flesh it commemorates has done its deed and passed the world by. But there is as much future as past in the statue of Anne Hutchinson, which, after these many months, attained yesterday its pedestal on Beacon Hill. Even in the past part of it lies a lesson for the future. Here, hard by the capital of Massachusetts, where lawmakers cannot fail to see, is the monument to a woman whom Massachusetts once banished for her teachings. But there is a part of it that belongs entirely to the future. There are no women in the legislature, at the head of state departments, or in higher executive positions. As she stands there, a lone heroine among the stern heroes that fill the State House grounds. The bronze Anne Hutchinson is a promise that there will be real live women in positions of prominence on Beacon Hill in the near future. In the presence of this first woman leader among the men who have led in the past, Massachusetts can gain an inkling of the co-leadership that is to come. Now, obviously, since then, there are women in Massachusetts legislature. There are women in State Department positions. And there are women serving in the United States legislature and within the State Department. However, in this time right now, as I am making this video, those numbers may be diminishing. That is one issue I want us to think about. And there's another that brings me to how we might think about the impact of Anne Hutchinson and the other women that haven't been named, but who were part of her circles, and perhaps who did dare to think for themselves and start to push the envelope on religious thinking and education and perhaps even government in the 17th century. Anne's father valued his daughter as much as he did his sons. He educated her alongside her brothers, taught her to speak her truth, and encouraged critical thinking skills. No doubt she did the same with her 14 children. And her husband valued those things too. He supported her. He supported her in New England, and he supported her in the New World. So I ask you, what is it about well-educated, thought-provoking, visible women that threatens men so much that they are willing to commit violence against, deny rights for, and demean and devalue the contributions of women, either consciously or unconsciously, even if they are in a relationship with them or not. And women, to you, why do so many remain in relationship with men who are in positions of power or sit in judgment of women, whether that is on the bench or at the bar, making rules and jokes based on the way they look, what they weigh, who they love, how old they are, how smart they are, what job they do, what she's wearing, how many children she has? Women, are you afraid to be the subject of those rules and jokes so much that you stay in the shadows, afraid to be seen, afraid to be heard? Why do you sit in judgment of other women for those very same things? Why would you vote for someone who has a disdain for women? I ask myself these questions every day. Anne Hutchinson was banished from her very city and colony and church because she didn't have freedom of speech, or she scared men. We take that right to be seen, to be heard, that freedom of speech for granted right now. And our forefathers separated church and state for a very good reason. But as you know, it is not the way the world works all over. There are places in this world right now where you cannot speak freely about many things. Maybe it's even at someone's kitchen table. And the fact that I can publish this YouTube video and mention my distaste of our current president and disappointment over half of our legislative body right now, and half of the United States voters that put them in office this year, is a current right that I do not take for granted, but I cherish. People before us have paid very high prices for these opportunities and rights that we enjoy today. Never have I felt so grateful for women like Anne, who have been brave enough to stand against the current norms, to open minds and hearts to new ways of being in the world, and to advocate for new perspectives, even if we disagree. Every day, we should challenge norms and ask, why do we do this? And who might this hurt? And if the answers make you squirm, then let's make some changes so that the why benefits us all as humans and hurts no one. Thank you for being with me again today for this edition of HerStance. Hit subscribe below before you go. And see you next time.